going to do Pei Dalach Tesvav, a very halacha that most people skip. And it says, like, you'll see. Mine oifos, you'll hear. Mine oifos, hagedelim be'ilan. There are kinds of birds that grow in trees. Utuluyim be'ilan b'chartumeim. They hang from the trees by their beaks. Asurim mishum sheretz ha-sheretz al-aretz. They are usher as a sheretz. Okay? So, the reason why most people skip it is because they don't know, and neither do I, what we're talking about. What is he describing? It sounds, the description sounds like a little bit like a woodpecker. Okay? And as they hang from the tree by their beaks. Okay? And woodpeckers actually come from trees. That is to say, the mother woodpecker, or the parents bore a hole in the tree and laid their eggs in the tree, so they sort of come from the tree. Maybe that's what it means. I don't know. I don't really know what it means. They nest in the tree. That's what they dig a hole in the tree, and that's where they live. Maybe it means like a hummingbird. If you ever saw a hummingbird, hummingbirds look like they're hanging from the tree by their beaks. They're flapping right. I don't know what it is. Okay, and that's probably why most people skip it. And because who cares, sort of. But it turns out that there's something that for us appropriate to learn from it. So we'll go through this. I was going to skip it also, but it turns out there's something here.
So it's also because sheretz,
it's a sheretz, right?
So it's not a bird.
Right. So that's what the sheretz is. So the question is first is, well, what is the Mechaber trying to say? And that's what we're going to talk about. Where is this Shulchan Aruch coming from? There's a bunch of Rishonim we talk about. The Big History brings a whole bunch of Rishonim about this. So let's see what the sheretz is. This comes from a smak. Okay, it's almost word for word. Not exactly, but almost word for word out of a smak.
Out of a smak?
Smak. Smak, okay?
So it's not original from the Gemara or something?
No. This thing is a smak. Okay? This is almost completely straight from a smak. So, but he doesn't say what it means. He doesn't say what he's trying to say. Like, what you're saying is almost word for word out of this smak. So what is it talking about? So Dr. Moshe brings Mordechai. That the Mordechai says in Chulin, says that the reason why this bird is different than all other birds is that this bird grows from the tree, so it has the din of a fruit. And, so it's not an animal. He says, so it's a fruit. This is the first sheet that he brings, is that it's a fruit. And you can just eat it. Just take it off and, you don't have to shecht it. You just take it off and eat it. Okay? So the Mordechai thinks that that's, he says it just grows out of the tree. It doesn't come from, we'll see more about this, that's what we're going to talk about. It doesn't come from parents, it just comes out of the tree. So it's mutter, it's like a fruit. The Mordechai says, well, he brings a raya from a Gemara. You figure. He brings a raya from a Gemara. That's the Gemara he's going on. The Gemara in Chulin that says that things that grow without parents also have a din of a sheretz. The Gemara is not really about a sheretz, but he says it has to do with all animals. Having a parent has nothing to do with it. You could be an animal without having a parent. It's not a criteria to being an animal. And the male, he says, so it's not a fruit, it's an animal. So he says, so you have to shecht it. Okay, so you have to shecht it. It's a bird, and you have to shecht it in order to eat it. That's the Mordechai. The Mordechai first brings a day that says it should be like a fruit. That's the other side. That maybe it's a fruit because it just comes out and it just pops out of the tree. He says, no. Just because you don't have parents, that doesn't stop you from being a fruit. It doesn't stop you from being an animal. So you're a bird. It's a kosher bird, and you shecht it and you can eat it. Okay. The Dr. Moshe then brings the Issa V'Heter, says, who brings this? The Issa V'Heter brings this. And the Issa V'Heter is not really in Hilchos Toloim. The Issa V'Heter is in the halachos of birds. He's right in the middle of talking about which birds need a Messiah. That's what he's right in the middle of talking about which birds need a Messiah. Whether you do need a Messiah, you don't need a Messiah for a bird. And stuck there in the middle of this is that he brings that the Mordechai says, or some people say, that you could be matir with shchita. And he says, no, it's not true. You can't be matir with shchita because it's not a bird, it's a sheretz. So you could be matir a bird with shchita, but you can't be matir a sheretz with shchita. So therefore, it's not a ger. So it's sort of like as in. It's as if to say, they would have said that it's a bird and you could shecht it, which would have been the gate to his shiloh, whether you need a Messiah or not. That would have fit into the shiloh, right there. Does it need a Messiah? You say, don't even think about it. Don't think about whether this bird needs to have a Messiah, because it's not important. It's not a bird, it's a sheretz. Okay?
Does the Mordechai say it's a sheretz also?
He says it's not a sheretz. He says it's a bird. You shecht, he says it's not a fruit. The Mordechai first says someone said it's a fruit. He says, no, it's not a fruit. It's a bird, and you have to shecht it, and then you can eat it.
So you're saying, okay.
It's a bird. Well,
it's three opinions. We got three opinions now.
Right. We have three opinions.
Sheretz and a bird.
Nachon. Correct. The Yam Shlomo says that the reason to think that it should be a sheretz instead of a bird is because since the Yam Shlomi actually agrees with the Mordechai. Yam Shlomi says that you could shecht it and eat it. Yam Shlomi says, the Yam Shlomi says you should shecht it and eat it. He says the tzad to think that it's a sheretz is because he doesn't agree with this, but the tzad to think it's a sheretz is because shrotzim have that property that they just come from nothing. Okay, which is what we're going to be talking about more. If they come from nothing, they come from nothing, they come from no parents. So the tzad to think this thing is like a sheretz is because they come from parents. He doesn't agree with that. And he says, he doesn't say what is the criteria between a sheretz and a bird. He doesn't say what the difference is. How do you know when does something cross the line from being a bird to being a bug? What's the cutoff that makes you in between them? So, but he says he thinks it's a bird and you could shecht it. Okay, the Mechaber says that it's a sheretz. Okay, the Mechaber is passing that it is a sheretz. The Shach says a whole pile of Achronim say that agree with the Mechaber. Again, I mentioned to a few people who think that it's actually a bird and you can check that or it's a fruit, you can eat it. But he says everybody agrees to a lot of people agree to the Mechaber, and therefore we treat it like a sheretz. Okay, now we haven't heard yet. Well, what is it that differentiates taka sheretz from a bird? Well, we don't really know. I mean, if you see a pigeon, you say that's a bird, and if you see a mosquito, you say that's a sheretz. But we don't know where do you cross over from being this to this? What's the criteria that makes it? We don't really know. But then the Beragayla brings it here, and the Pri Megadim both bring a Maril who talks about this. And the person asking the question said like this. The person said, "You're telling me that you could eat these birds." The person is asking, "You're telling me that you can eat these birds." In fact, the Maril says you can't eat them. But you're telling me that you can eat these birds. Why is this bird any different than a sheretz, than a yitosh? What we translate as mosquito. Okay, why is it any different than a yitosh? Okay, that makes me think. When I heard that, it made me think more like the hummingbird kind of thing, because woodpeckers, I think, are bigger. But anyhow, we don't know. It's some bird, whatever it is. He says, what's the difference? They're both the same thing. Why is one a bird and one is a sheretz? Why do you minority this one? That was the shayla that he asked Maril, and the Maril said like this. He says, all animals, both the yitosh and not all. He says both the yitosh and this bird come from an egg that the mother laid. He says, but the nafkamina is like this. Bird, the mother lays the egg. Let's say a chicken. A chicken lays an egg, and 21 days later, the egg hatches. Okay? When it lays the egg, X amount of days later, the egg hatches. But in a sheretz, it's not what happens. The mother lays the egg. The egg doesn't hatch at a specific amount of days later on. The egg hatches when the egg decides that it's time to hatch. When conditions are ripe, the egg decides that it's time to hatch. Insect eggs don't hatch at a set amount of time. A chicken egg, if the mother doesn't sit on it, then it's not going to hatch after 23 days or 25 days. It's going to never hatch. It's not going to happen. The conditions have to be right for it to hatch, but if it doesn't do it in 21 days, it's not going to happen. As opposed to a bug egg, that's not what happens. The bug egg, the bug gets laid, the egg gets laid. When the conditions are right, it hatches. And in fact, I spoke to entomologists, emailed a whole entomologists all over the place, a whole bunch of them, who all agree, who all thought, I didn't ask them if they agreed with
Entomologists study what?
Bugs. I didn't ask them if they saw them real. I just asked them about this thing about how they hatch and blah, blah, blah. And they all said that bug eggs hatch from the same bug over a range of time depending on conditions. Depending on how the conditions are, they'll spend more or less time until they hatch. And even bugs have a thing, there's a term that I learned when I was looking at this, there's a term called overwintering. Okay? It's a term that's used b'chlal for animals, and particularly for bugs, of how does an animal survive the winter? How does it manage to make it through? How come, for example, you see lots of mosquitoes in the summer and we see none in the winter. So where do they come back in the summer? Where do they come from? They didn't go to Florida. Where do they come from? So it's a whole study of how animals manage to live through the winter. Okay? And one of the ways that animals manage through the winter is they have overwintering eggs. They lay an egg, but that egg doesn't hatch tomorrow or in 2 weeks or in 6 weeks. That egg lasts through the whole winter, and then it hatches at the end of the winter. So what's going on? How come the egg, sometimes it hatches in 12 days, and sometimes it hatches in 3 months? That's because it's waiting for conditions to be ripe. So the Maril says that in that case, the insect is controlling when it should be born. So that is not a property of an animal. That's a property of an insect that it comes by itself. It just pops out. It just decides when it wants to be born. Okay, it comes from a parent, but it's not the parent's decision that the child should be born. It's the baby's decision when it's ready to be born, and that's what makes it.
Is he no arguing with Tzis on where it comes from? He said it comes from a Zochar or Kalim late night.
Right.
And somebody else was saying it's a fruit, but other than he
right.
the whole different Tzis. It's
So
not coming from the...
He actually is answering a specific question. What he argued on the broader question, I'm not sure. He's answering, what's the difference between this bird and the Yitosh? He's saying that bird, some people said Takir, some people said that bird just came out of the tree. Okay, so maybe on the Matthias is a question.
I mean, there's a fruit. If it says late, but Zochar or Kalim, whatever.
It's a good question. I'm not sure. Okay, I can't tell you for sure that they're all talking about the exact same bird, but it sure seems like, no, I mean, all the places are connecting them, and they sure seem to be talking about the same thing. It happens to be, I don't know what the reason for this is, it happens to be that at the end of the Maril, he argues on this person, and he says, you're not allowed to eat this animal, and I don't know what the reason. Okay, but I'm putting that on the side. I'm focusing on the beginning part where the Maril asked the person asked the Maril, what is this different than an insect? And the Maril gave us a criteria that we should understand what makes something into an insect versus a bird. And so now when our din says that these birds are Sheretz HaSheretz Su'aretz, according to the Maril, we're learning what makes something into Hilchos Shvatzim. I don't know which way Hilchos birds are before this, I think. So what's the difference between a bird and a sheretz? Now we have at least someone telling us the difference between them. This is what makes it a bird, this is what makes it a sheretz. Okay, so now before we move on, just like Yossi actually said it himself, there's 3 sheets over here about what this unusual, what this bird is, whatever it is, we don't know what it is. Either it's a fruit, it comes out of a tree so it's considered a fruit, or it's considered a bird, which is mutter if you shecht it, or you say that it's a sheretz and you can't eat it. Okay, of course, Lamaisa, we couldn't eat it, even if we wouldn't pass it on to Mechaber, because we have a special thing that we have to have them served for birds. So even let it be a bird, it's not going to make it mutter any. Unless it would be a fruit, then we could eat it. But if it's a bird, we wouldn't be able to eat it anyhow.
We have a prior problem with it.
Which is what? We don't know what it is. Right. So you mean if we figured out what it was, that's no, you're right about that. Okay. But I'm saying the shaila usually, what I mean is, well, let me rephrase what I say. The shaila whether something is a bird or a sheretz does not negate to us lamaisa, because if we had a thing and we weren't sure if it was a bird or a sheretz, we couldn't eat it either way. Let it be a sheretz, we can't eat it. Let it be a bird, we can't eat it either. We're not any, for us, knowing whether something is a bird or a sheretz doesn't make a difference to us. We can't eat it anyhow. Unless it's a chicken, we can't eat it anyhow. We have 5 birds that we're not allowed to eat. If a new bird showed up and we said, is this a bird or is it a sheretz? There's no difference. It wouldn't be, Lamaisa, it wouldn't make a difference. Okay. So now that we just heard this Maril, it opens up the door to a different child. Okay? A new answer to a famous child. We've been Maramis with before. It's really for the next thing, really a 150-year-old child. Which is, I'm going to tell you in a minute, a few places where Chazal say things that imply that they believed what was the science of the times, that there's such a thing as spontaneous generation. Animals can just come out of nothing. They can just grow out of the garbage. They can just come out of nothing, and which was at the time was considered acceptable science. That was considered, people believed that. That was what was appropriate at that time. That was, people thought that was true. And then 150 years ago, Louis Pasteur and his friends came up and they proved that it's not true. And since then, no one scientific believes in spontaneous generation. I said no scientific. So the scientific world doesn't believe in spontaneous generation. So there's been this 150-year-old child as to how do we understand these dinim? What happened is those dinim that seem to be based on spontaneous generation versus science who says to us that there's no spontaneous generation. Okay, so let me just give you some examples of it so it'll help us focus on what the Shabbos is. One is, the most famous example of it is the Gemara says in Shabbos that Hayri Kini b'Shabbos is Potter. It's actually Machlokes in the Gemara, but we pass him that it's Potter. And the reason why it's Potter is because a Kina is not part of a Rava, as the Gemara says, as opposed to the Elam that they used to kill, that they killed for the Mishkan, that they are part of Rava, and therefore it's not done to the Mishkan, and therefore you're allowed to Hari Kina on Shabbos. Okay, so what does that mean? It's not part of Rava. Part of Rava, that sure sounds like it's saying if it's not part of Rava, then where does it come from? It just comes from no place. It just appears from nothing. That implies that there's spontaneous generation. The other thing is the next Gemara, the next din that we're going to see, next time's din, which is about, it actually became pretty famous nowadays, which is the worms and the fish. That the Gemara says that if you find a worm in the fish's intestines, that worm is usher because it might have swam in from the outside. If you find a worm in the fish's flesh, that worm is mutter. Because it didn't come from the outside, it came from the inside. It's a part of the fish, and you're allowed to eat it. Okay, so that also what do you mean it's part of the fish? It didn't come from the fish. The scientific mind would say it didn't come from the fish. It came from his mother laid an egg someplace, or they have their own theories of how it got in there, but they sure don't think it came from inside the fish. So that also is saying is the Gemara used the word mineka gavli, which is also the kind of word saying it grows from there. The Gemara about the Keenan didn't say it grows by itself; it just said it's not part of a rava. We sort of our imagination tells us that it grows by itself. Okay. And last is we had two places in Halacha Ches and Halacha Yud we spoke about. Two places where poskim explained halachas. It was really very similar explanation using the idea of spontaneous generation. In Halacha Ches, we talked about it from Nishmas Adam, about when we do or do not rely on sampling. We were actually talking about it this week. When do we do or not rely on sampling? And he was masbir the difference between when we allow sampling and when we don't, based on spontaneous generation. Things that, okay, that was sampling, that is to say, rather than to check every single piece, when there's a bug in there, you just spot check it. You just say, I checked enough and I decide that's good enough. But the Ramah says, the Ramah says you're not allowed to do that, and sometimes you are allowed to. That's what he was using. And the Taz, about another case, a similar case, about if you find 3 bugs in something, when you are or not allowed to eat. Okay, both of them use the assumption of spontaneous generation to say they're there. Okay, so so this is a famous question. It's been around for 150 years. So, one answer, one extreme is, there's a Sefer Pachad Yitzchak, it's like an encyclopedia, and this Sefer Pachad Yitzchak talks about the Shaila.
Not Pranti.
Okay, it's probably the most famous part of the whole Sefer Pachad Yitzchak. It really is, where he talks about this. It's not really in the style of that Sefer, but anyhow, that's what he talks about. And he says, he brings up the idea that maybe now that we learned that there's no spontaneous generation, hurry kina b'Shabbat should be also. You shouldn't be allowed to kill a kina on Shabbos. He doesn't say that in the end, but he brings up such a possibility that maybe we should just. The din is just based on a mistake. The din is based on a science. It's based on science. Famous Ram ben Arama that if it's based on the science of the day, Chum said things based on their science. If it's not true, it's not true. He doesn't go that way. But that's one extreme of people who would say that one. In the middle. Okay, we'll go to a middle shita, also a very well-known answer to this question is from Rav Dessler. It's printed in Michtav Eliyot, but it's in a footnote. So we've been quoting what Rav Dessler told him, which is, he says that the Torah only cares about things that are visible to the human eye. It doesn't care about things that are microscopic or that are esoteric or things that people can't see, that you can't identify with your faculties. And therefore, when a bug's lays an egg that will be microscopic, that egg doesn't exist. Halachically doesn't exist.
It's Aruch HaShulchan, no?
Does Aruch HaShulchan? Okay, maybe. So then that thing doesn't exist. No, he says it in that way, but I'm talking about to answer this question. You're right. He says, a lot of people say when it's microscopic it doesn't count. But he says what happens is, at some point it grows to the point that it's now visible. So when it crosses that line, it's now gone from being halachically non-existent to being existent. So it just came out of no place. It just created itself out of nothing, because beforehand it was actually there, but halachically it wasn't there. So the din says it's not here. Well, if it's not here, and now it became here, so it just came out of nothing. Even though the mother actually laid the egg, but what the mother did doesn't count. From the din doesn't count because what the mother did is not something that was visible, and therefore it's considered to have become visible at this point. And therefore, so when we say it came by itself, in truth it came from a mother, but in din it came from itself. Okay, that's the answer of Dessler gives.
So I always have a problem. How does that work out with lice? Lice is
we're going to get to lice in a second. We're going to get back to lice, and you're right. We're going to get back to that in a second. Okay. And then we have the extreme. We have one extreme was what the Pachad Yitzchak brought. The other extreme is the people who say is that, hey, look, Chazal said that it works based on spontaneous generation. We don't understand it, because according to the science of today, we don't understand it. We look at it and we say, nah, it's not spontaneous generation. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, to us, we don't get that. So we say, look, Chazal said it, and Chazal said it. We take their word on it. We don't have to be so smart to figure it out. We don't understand it, so we don't understand everything either. Does anybody know what the Rikiya is? We don't know what the Rikiya is. We have a Pasuk Chumash. We don't know what the Rikiya is. So we don't know what Chazal meant when they said spontaneous generation. Chazal, we don't have to know everything. This is lots of people who are very. I'm using the word. It's going to sound like I'm insulting, but I'm not. Very to me mistake. It's very like if Chazal said it, then that's the way it is. I decide. I'm stuck. Who holds it? Who holds it?
Everybody.
Well, what's the matter? Are we keen on Shabbos? Are you allowed to kill a keen or not? Well, if I ask you, what's the difference? Are you allowed to kill a kina? You would say yes, you're allowed to kill a kina. I say, but the Gemara's reason is not true. You'd say, I don't know, not my problem. The din is the din Shulchan Aruch. Gemara says you're allowed to do it. It's not my problem why you're allowed to do it. I don't have to think and answer the question. If I can't answer it, I can't answer it. Okay. Now, but now we may have just the maril that we just said opens up the possibility of a completely different answer to the question. the Maril said that a yitosh, he was talking about a mosquito, okay, a yitosh does come from an egg that the mother laid. He makes a point. It comes from an egg that the mother laid. And Aval Pekin, it's not considered to have come from the mother. Why? Because in animals, the parent lays the egg, and the parent decides that now it's time to be born. When the chicken lays an egg, 21 days later, that chicken's going to be born. If it's not born because the conditions weren't right, it's never going to be born. But it's completely in the control of the mother that the baby should be born. The mother lays the egg, and now, based on that, because the mother laid it, the egg is going to be born. But the Maril says, but the Yitosh, the mother lays the egg, and that's not the decision if the baby's going to be born. The baby will now be born when so to speak, when the baby decides that the time is right, when the conditions are right. It doesn't always come out in 10 days. It can be 10 days, or 14 days, or 6 months until it decides to come out. So that was the Maril. You missed that part. So that's the Maril says. And in fact, it's true. As we said, that's the truth that insects do that. That the egg doesn't always hatch after a set amount of time. In Cain, that's how he defined the difference between a bug and an animal. That's how he described the difference between them. And that means it. So when we say, now when we heard and we said that it's not parvarava, that didn't mean, the Gemara doesn't mean to say it's not parvarava, mean it doesn't need a mother and a father. Yeah, it needs a mother and a father. But that's not the end of the story. The mother and the father didn't create the child. The mother and the father did a part, but since the egg has a role in deciding when it's born, for sure, for Hilchos Shabbos we get that. For Hilchos Shabbos, it's not like a regular animal. Animals are born. The mother gives birth, and the baby is born. The baby has no, so to speak, no say in the matter. The Gemara said that the worms come out by themselves. The worms are born. We would now understand when we say Minei Kagavli, the Minei Kagavli, it's even stronger. What the wording would mean is, it means, Ken Zayin, the mother laid an egg. But the mother didn't decide that now the egg should be born. The worm itself in the fish decides, okay, conditions are right, it's time to come out now. I'm deciding that I should, so to speak, I should be born now, and therefore, he decides that he should come, and therefore that animal. Yes, what do you want to say?
I understand the connection making.
Okay.
The Maril is a totally different thing. He's not asking it's an insect. He's saying that's property of an insect and not a bird. This makes it an insect, not a bird. But regular insects that are power barava, that are also to kill on Shabbos, are also decided You're saying
you're ahead of me. You're right about that. I'm just saying, at the first glance, when we saw this Maril, I said, whoa, so maybe that'll help us understand what these Gemaras are talking about things being spontaneously generated. The Gemara didn't mean that they are completely spontaneously generated. Maybe the Gemara just meant was that the Gemara wasn't going with a hezbollah that they mamish come from the zero. But since they play a role in their own development, they're not the same as
that's a regular bug. That's a regular insect. Every insect is like that.
Asking if kill any insect.
I'm going to. Okay, I'm just at first let open a possibility. You're too fast. What can I tell you? It just opens such a possibility. Okay. We have two questions. Okay. The first question could be like this. I'm going to say what Yossi said in my own way. The Gemara doesn't say that if you kill a kina. The Gemara doesn't only, it happens to be to machlokes the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't only say that we paskin that if you kill a kina, it's mutter or potter. The Gemara says also that if you kill a parish, then you're not allowed to kill a parish on Shabbos. Okay? What is that? So the Taisus on Daf base, which is we basically pass on the Taisus that a kina is lice. They're white and they don't jump. That's lice. They're head lice and they're white and they don't jump. And a parish is the black ones that do jump, which people translate as fleas. Okay? Which those are properties of fleas. They jump and they're black. Okay? The killing lice you're allowed to do, and killing fleas you're not allowed to do. Okay? So now we would have to make a study of these eggs and say, well, is there really a difference between the way lice eggs hatch and flea eggs hatch? Lice eggs do hatch based on the conditions on the head. It is true. They do hatch different amounts of time based on how long they had. But we would guess that fleas do the same thing. We don't know. But we would guess that fleas have similar properties, that when the dog's hair looks good, then they turn the head. Or whatever. I don't know what they're waiting for, but we would guess. The entomologist, sure, I didn't ask them this kind of a problem. Do fleas do the same thing? But in their mind, it was all bugs do that. That's just a property of bugs. Like the Morel said, bugs do that. Okay, that's how they saw it. Not to be machalik between one and the other. Okay? So now, maybe we could help like this. The Gemara says that a parish is parvarava. The Gemara says Yitush is not parvarava, and a parish is parvarava. Okay? Now, even though it says that the Gemara that a parish is parvarava, the Rambam says that's not true. The Rambam says a parish is not parvarava either. The Rambam is masbir that what the Gemara means to say is like this. Yitush is any bug that is either not parvarava. Let me see if let me just read it right. If it's not parvarava, or it comes from spoiling food, that you're allowed to kill on Shabbos. If it comes from the ground, a yitosh comes from the ground, and therefore it's more like an animal you're not allowed to kill. Okay, the difference is where this thing, they're all not parvarava, but some of them do something that's like being parvarava, and some of them do not. Some of them come from the ground, and some of them come from spoiling food. I don't know what the difference is. I don't understand what the difference is. But the Mishnah Berurah says it a different way. The Mishnah Berurah doesn't say exactly what the Rambam says. It's the same idea, but not exactly the Rambam. The Mishnah Berurah says like this. Kina comes from human sweat. Okay? As opposed to a parish comes from the ground. Okay? So, both of them are not parvarava. It's a very funny thing. The Gemara says it is parvarava, but he said no. Then both of them are not parvarava, but it comes from the ground. So the way I thought you could understand that along the Mahalach of the Maru would be like this: if the bug is laid by everyone agrees now. We're saying the Maru said they're laid by the mother. The mother laid the egg. If another living being has a role in this being born, meaning it comes from the human sweat, means the human has some input into whether it's going to be born. If another being has a role in it, that's not parvarava. It's not coming from its parents. The other life force that's coming from it is another human being. That's not parvarava. That you're allowed to kill on Shabbos. If it comes from the ground, it just comes from the environment, is what helps it decide whether it should be born. That is more similar to animals. Meaning the only living thing that contributed to it being born was its mother, and therefore that thing you're not allowed to kill on Shabbos because that comes from the mother. It depends on the environment. Good. So it's the mother and the environment. That's still considered the mother. But if it's the mother and somebody else, that's considered that it's not coming from the mother enough to be chayav on Shabbos. So what I'm saying is that it could be. What I'm saying, if you read the Gemara says that certain bugs are a part of Rava, then you can't work with the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't go with the Gemara saying that bugs are not, they come by themselves because of a different reason. They come from parents. I'm saying Lamais is, that's not how we read the Gemara. The Mishnah Berurah reads it, which is a variation on the Rambam. The Mishnah Berurah is reading it that all bugs are not part of Rava, but the difference is the ones you're allowed to kill have to do with whether there's another being that participates in them, or if it's just environmental that helps them develop. So we could learn like the Maral. We could say like the Maral says that certain bugs, all bugs have this property that they decide when they should be born, and they're different. That's what defines a bug. They decide when it should be born. There's things that make it decide. Laying Hilchos Shabbos, that is not the whole factor. It depends on whether there's another being that helped just make that decision, or it did it just environmentally. That will be the difference between whether you could kill it or you can't kill it on Shabbos. But then we'll understand the thing that we're talking about. The Minei Karavi means is all bugs do that. They decide when they should be born. So when the Gemara says you're letting the worm and the fish is mutter because it Minei Kagavi grows itself, it doesn't mean mamish grows itself. It means is the mother lays an egg, but the insect has a role in when it's going to be born. That's enough to make it a little bit separated from its mother. Linear Shabbos doesn't work exactly like that. Depends. So maybe that will be an answer. Okay, good. I can't say it's great, and it does. The Rambam I can't explain it. Because Rambam says it depends if it's garbage or dirt. I don't understand what Rambam says. So maybe if I understood it, I could use the same kind of a hezbollah. I don't really know what's the difference if it comes from garbage or comes from dirt. I don't get that. Okay.
What's his word for garbage?
I don't remember.
Glowing.
No, yeah, I remember this word. Okay, whatever. It's in Perek Yudal. Second halach in Perek Yudal. Okay. Now the next thing's like this. Another question we have is, this is maybe a more serious question than what the Maral says, is that the Gemara says, when the Gemara says that Kinim are not part of Rava, the Gemara gets a kasha there. The Gemara is not satisfied with that maniam that Kinim are not part of Rava. In fact, the Gemara, the Pasuk says that the Rebbeinu Shalom is mazin beitzei Kina. So, in fact, the Gemara, beitzei Kina means the eggs of Kinim. So that means it is part of Rava. Kinim lay eggs, and the Rebbeinu Shalom takes care of even the smallest being, even the eggs of a Kina. So, frankly, Gemara, Kinim do have eggs. You're telling me that they don't. Unless they do have eggs. And for the Gemara, the word Beit Kina does not mean eggs of lice. Beit Kina is a proper noun. It's the name of a certain min of bugs, of a certain min of something. It's not the eggs. It's not eggs of Kinim. It is an item called Beit Kina. The thing. That's what it is. So that item, and so Beit Kinim really do not have eggs. There are no eggs to Kinim. Okay. So according to the Maril, what was the Gemara's kasha? What kind of kasha is that? Frankly, Gemara, they don't have eggs. They have eggs. No problem. I don't have problems with bug having eggs. Gemara didn't have a problem with them having eggs. He just said they have eggs, but they hatch themselves. They decide when they should hatch themselves, so they're not.
Maril?
What?
It's on the Maril?
I'm based on the Maril. The Maril said...
Because you're shot in the Maril, you want to extend the Maril all the way into
those, yeah. He was talking about specific... You're right. You're right. The Maril was talking about a Yitosh. So maybe he had a special thing about a Yitosh. Okay, maybe you could say that. It didn't sound like that. The Maril...
You were talking about a Yitosh. Talking about that creature.
No, he was contrasting that creature to a Yitosh. The Shiloh was, how is that different than a Yitosh? How come this is a bird, and a Yitosh is a bug? That was the person's question. He said, no, not a kasha. The fine line between birds and bugs is that birds...
How does that translate to a kasha on this Gemara?
Because he's saying is, really bugs come from eggs that were laid by their mothers. But they're considered to grow themselves because they choose when they should be born. So he's saying no, there really are eggs to bugs. Bugs do lay eggs, but those eggs don't have the status of coming from their mother. So what he told me, the Gemara said, when the Gemara said that bugs come by themselves, the Gemara said they don't have eggs. The Gemara was so bothered, the Gemara said, the pasuk that says that they have eggs is talking about something else. It doesn't mean that. What do you mean? They have eggs. Most of them have to have eggs. You just said, they have eggs, but those eggs don't count. So it could be he's only talking about a Yitosh. It doesn't sound like that. That's not the impression. So so it leaves us with a little bit of a question on this, if to say that the Maril means that's the shot in the bugs, when the Gemara said that Beit Kina doesn't mean it. Okay, that's a question. Just a side point. I can't hold myself back, so I'll tell you the side point, which is that the if you ask, Yossi said this before, go to any mother who has or had daughters with long hair, they don't know what Beit Kina look like. Every one of them has pulled out nits out of their daughters' ears, right? Everyone sat there and pulled out. You have daughters. You have pulled nits out of their daughters' hair, so they don't know what it looks like. They can tell the difference between that and a piece of dandruff. So why are we saying the Gemara says there's no Beit Kina? Rabbi Dessler said it's because they've gone from being microscopic to not. That's how they get laid. That certain size. Right. No one could tell. Come on, go into. JD Boy's having a lice check this week, whatever it is. Go into your watch ladies pulling out Beit Kina every day. So what does it mean? How can the Gemara say they don't have eggs? And what does it even mean they don't have eggs? I'm not talking about from the scientific. I'm talking about go ask your wife and they'll tell you that they have eggs. So what does that tell you? It means is because when you look at those eggs, ladies nowadays will tell you, I know that thing isn't it. Okay, but there isn't anything identifiable about that item that tells you this thing is a bug or it's a bug egg. You look at it, there's nothing. It doesn't have wings, it doesn't have antennas, it doesn't move, it doesn't do anything. It's just stuck on your hair. It could be a piece of dirt. It could be some fungus that's growing. We have no idea what it is. Okay, we know about it because we're scientific and we know that those things are the eggs that came out of those kingdoms. But if you look at it, that doesn't mean anything. So when the Gemara says there's no such thing, it means it's regular.
If you sit and watch it, you'll see the lights curl out at some point.
If you sat there for long enough,
you see the lights curl out at some point.
Okay, so you think that's what it is? You think that the people sat there long enough?
I don't know if it's scientific. You could do it. You can be aware that it's a lice. We're looking at it.
Okay.
So why should halachically not be considered a piece of
So you have a kasha. You're stuck with, I don't have a kasha. You have a kasha. If your wife...
No, you have a kasha too.
No, if your wife knows that those are lice eggs, and she could do that by just sitting there looking at her daughter's head for 2 weeks until it pops out, so then, what was Chazal talking about? They said, there's no such thing as Beit Kina. If their kids didn't have lice, there's no such thing as Beit Kina. So I have no problem with that. Because if you look at it, the thing doesn't look like anything. Because things that are not recognizable, just because you could see it, not being recognizable doesn't mean anything. So not recognizable, if it's not recognizable, it doesn't exist. It does, from the din, it's just a piece of dirt, another piece of dirt on your head. If you think that thing is usher, then you have a problem. Because if my wife knows what nits look like, and she tells it those, she can tell that from a piece of dandruff, so what will Chazal talk to me about? Anyway, so that's